right, we will go ahead and start. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know, I am Sadiq Perry, the Academic Programs Coordinator here with the School of Environment. Thank you for joining us for the latest installment of FAMU SOE's weekly seminar series. Today we have two guests with us, and I won't go over the long introductions and everything, but to all our students, please remember to sign up for a handshake. We've had some professional development opportunities pass through there. All of our presenters who are with companies are working through, for the most part, they are sending them to me and I'm forwarding it to everyone, but check out handshake as well. So they will show up in there. Also remember to sign up for the Remind app. That's where I send you guys text messages, updates on what's going on, if the building's closed for whatever reason. And usually I put the weekly seminar series links in there as well each Friday. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our speakers today, Ms. Farah Ilami and Ms. Emily Jones. All right, so for Ms. Ilami, Ms. Farah Ilami plans and manages projects that benefits coastal wildlife statewide and coordinates among several organizations working with the coastal wildlife issues. Her work focuses on wildlife and habitat needs, as well as socioeconomic issues pertaining to Florida's coastal areas. Coastal issues that she addresses include sea level rise, shoreline stabilization, wildlife entanglement, marine debris, beach rack, and mechanical beach cleaning, and and wildlife disturbance. Ms. Ilami, Dr. Ilami serves on the Habitat Resources Team, a Marine Debris Cross Team Initiative for the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, Florida's Historian Restoration Teams, and Florida's Hooked Pelican Working Group. She has a bachelor's in biology and a master's in oceanography. And Emily Evans is a Northwest Regional conservation biologist for the Panhandle of Florida. Emily is responsible for leading and coordinating dynamic projects and related to the conservation of threatened and endangered species. Throughout her career, Emily has worked in the Southeast, focused on coastal and upland species and management. So let's give them some clapping emojis. Let's welcome them. Thank you both so much again for doing this. It is much appreciated and look forward to a great presentation. I ask that you put your questions in the group chat, or you can message them to me privately. Outside of that, please wait until the end for questions. Thank you again. I turn it over to you both.
Thank you all for having us. We're really grateful for this opportunity to get to meet you all and learn about what you guys are doing at FAMU, as well as the program. So just we don't have to do introductions. Thank you, Siddiqui, for that. But the title is Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Initiatives and Opportunities at FWC. So you can kind of see this is a twofold presentation today. And we're also going to be having a twofold presentation as far as I'll give the first half, and Farah's going to hop in about halfway through and give the rest of the presentation for the most part. All right. Farah, advance the slide, please. So just a quick outline and overview of today's topic. We wanted to give you all an introduction to the Florida Fish and Wildlife, the agency itself, kind of talk about the structure of the agency to kind of help you understand how the agency works and operates. We wanted to kind of highlight some of the specific initiatives that Farah and I work on and collaborate on through different partners with those programs. And then we want to kind of circle back to some career opportunities related to wildlife, environmental topics that may be applicable to you. Next slide, please. So the Florida Fish and Wildlife is a wildlife agency. is to manage fish and wildlife resources for the long-term well-being and for the benefit of the people. So this is comprehensive. We focus on managing fish and wildlife, identifying and proposing policy decisions that protect and conserve natural resources for long-term use and sustainability. So essentially, you could call us or think of it as a public trust, where FWC are the managers of the trust that take in input from stakeholders as well as staff. And I have a map here to show you the state of Florida and then our FWC jurisdictional regions. So you can see the Panhandle, where we are, Tallahassee, is the Northwest region. FARA is actually over in the North Central region in the Lake City office, but each region has different issues with different staff that work together to come up with solutions to those challenges and resource needs. Next slide. So FWC is actually a very large agency. We have over 2,000 full-time employees. We depend a lot on law enforcement. You can see that we've got over 800 law enforcement officers and staff that work for the agency. So staff work together to manage and protect a great number of wildlife species, over 500 species of wildlife, 200 species of freshwater fishes, and over 500 species of saltwater fishes. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the structure, and you can also find this on our website to learn more about the detail of how our agency is organized. But organizationally, FWC is comprised of a commission and multiple divisions and offices. We get a lot of things done, and we have to work in this framework for us to achieve those goals. The Florida Constitution authorizes the commission to enact rules and regulations regarding our state and wildlife resources. And to do that, we have 7 governor-appointed commissioners that meet 5 times a year to hear staff reports, consider different rule proposals and changes, and hear from stakeholders like you on local issues and propose changes to the rules. Because stakeholder engagement is very important to the commission and how we operate as an agency, the commission meeting meets in different locations each year and heavily depends on stakeholder input to weigh these decisions. So you can see here we've listed out the divisions and offices. So we've got 6 divisions, which are very comprehensive. So freshwater fish, habitat species conservation, hunting and game, law enforcement, marine fisheries, and the Research Institute. So those are pretty broad, but they are integrated, and we often work in overlapping topics and have to collaborate to achieve our goals. So within this, we have multiple offices. So continue on this very large, broad, expansive topic here. We have our community relations groups, licensing and permitting, our legal affairs, legislative affairs, the youth conservation network, and different support or administrative offices that help with finance and budget. So there are a huge number of jobs and responsibilities that go into our operation. Next slide, please. So today we wanted to focus on our division, which Farah and I are both in the Habitat and Species Conservation Division, and some of the work that we do through our division and section goals. And we wanted to highlight climate change and coastal initiatives, as we believe this is going to be very relatable to what you guys are working on and studying and learning in your career. So the Coastal Wildlife Conservation Initiative is an FWC program that was developed out of the need to focus on coastal wildlife issues. So this is a collaboration of various staff throughout the region, throughout the state, excuse me, including folks in our Research Institute, wildlife management and habitat managers, policy makers. So we come together fairly frequently to discuss important immediate wildlife issues that relate to the coast. So we also have the Climate Change Core Team. So this is a fairly new initiative. It's about 10 years old or so. It's a special initiative through FWC to build capacity to respond to climate change, to identify coordination opportunities, and to leverage funds and resources that we have through our agency, through the feds and other places to address climate change issues. So as you can see, this is just a small example of the collaboration of different divisions and biologists, but through these programs, we can identify and establish strategies to address priority conservation challenges. Next slide, please. So So kind of going down a little bit more, like focusing in, we wanted to address some of the high priority conservation challenges that we face in our state and that are constantly on our radar as biologists and natural resource managers. So we wanted to discuss impacts to sort of the, what I call the big three of our coastal taxonomic groups: sea turtles, shorebirds, and mammals, or primarily beach mice. Next slide, please. So I'm sure many of you all are familiar with these guys, but the first major taxonomic group is the marine and estuarine sea turtles. The top three species are the most common turtles found in Florida. We've got the green sea turtle, the loggerhead, and then the one on the right is a diamondback terrapin. So that's not a sea turtle, but it is an important species here on the coast. The bottom three turtle species are the hawksbill, the leatherback, and the Kemp's ridley. Those three are much more rare and more imperiled, but these are all threatened or listed in some way. The diamondback terrapin is different from the marine turtles because it's mainly found in the brackish waters rather than the open ocean, but its nesting period overlaps with marine turtles in the springtime. Although it's not threatened yet, the diamondback terrapin is listed as a species of greatest conservation need. Next slide, please. So marine and estuarine turtles do face many climate-related threats, and their overall vulnerability rating is high, given where they nest and where they occupy. So just a little side note, the overall vulnerability rating for all groups in this presentation was determined by using the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, the Standardized Index of Vulnerability Value Assessment, and the Gulf Coast Vulnerability Assessment. The main climate threat to sea turtles are sea level rise, increased temperatures, and increased harmful algal blooms. As sea level rises, many people start to harden their shorelines as protective measures for their property. So this decreases the available nesting habitat for turtles. Many turtles will come ashore searching for suitable habitat, but return to the ocean without laying their eggs as they are blocked by hardened shorelines. You can see this as an example in this photo. This is a false crawl where a turtle came ashore looking for nesting habitat, but this hardened concrete barrier inhibited their ability to nest. So other climate-related effects can disrupt populations over time is the imbalance of sex ratios, because sex of turtles is temperature dependent, such as warmer temperatures produce more females. Climate change may lead to a decrease in males. So for juvenile and adult turtles, another climate-related threat comes from the toxins produced by harmful algal blooms. So research demonstrate that those are most likely to proliferate with warmer ocean temperatures. So the toxins they produce can result in respiratory problems and even mortality in turtles as they eat smaller affected species. So during last year's red tide, we had 589 marine turtles reported as stranded as a result of the harmful algal blooms. Next slide, please. So the next major taxonomic group are shorebirds and seabirds. So you may not be quite as familiar with these species, but they do occur widely in the panhandle of Florida and throughout the state. So we've included the federally and state listed species that are found here in Florida. The American oyster catcher, which is the top row here, the piping plover and snowy plover are shorebirds, meaning they forage for food in the beach rack line and sometimes on oyster beds, and nest in solitary pairs on beaches. The black skimmer, which is the one that's skimming on the water at the top there, and the least tern are seabirds, meaning that they actually dive for fish in the water and they nest in large colonies on beaches. So both groups lay their eggs directly on the beach, like on sand, which leaves them vulnerable to a number of threats, as you can imagine. So the FWC has a relatively new shorebird program that dedicates resources and staff time to the conservation of these species. Next slide, please. So to go over some of the climate threats and impacts to shorebirds, they do face many threats, and the overall vulnerability rating is moderate to high. The main climate-related threat to birds are increased storms and hurricanes, increased temperatures, and harmful algal. As I'm sure you know, climate change will result in increased storms and hurricane frequency and intensity. These can affect shorebirds and seabirds by changing the nesting habitat. Storms can erode nesting beaches, forcing birds to look for other habitat in less suitable areas, For example, we do see lease terns occasionally use rooftops, but man-made structure to nest as an alternative. Storm surges can cause overwash, drowning chicks, and burying chicks and eggs in the sand. So you can see that's what happened here in the photo above. So in some cases, storms can actually be very beneficial, and they are actually dependent on that creation of open sandy habitat. But if there's persistent disturbance by people, dogs, or if there's a heavy-handed planting need or action employed at a site, it can cause the habitat to become unsuitable for nesting. So other climate-related effects that can harm bird population is heat stress for eggs and young. As mentioned previously, shorebirds and seabirds lay their eggs on the sand. So if the parents leave to go forage, or if they're disturbed for too long and are away from the nest, which is often something we see when people are too close to a nest or dogs are running around on the beaches without a leash, the heat can damage the eggs and chicks and actually lead to mortality. Similar to turtles, other climate-related threats come from the toxins produced by the harmful algal blooms, which can result in mortality from birds. During last year's red tide, at least 50, most likely more, were found dead as a result of the harmful algal bloom. All right, next slide. So finally, our other major taxonomic group are small mammals. So I have to admit, this is sort of my specialty here. I've spent a lot of time working with beach mice and have a deep love for them. They're very fascinating. So I highly recommend looking into these, as well as the other species we have. But you can see here, I've included 5 species of beach mice down in Florida. So the top 3 and the bottom 2 here on the slide, plus a salt marsh vole. All are federally listed and occur along the coastline of Florida. The beach mouse inhabits coastal systems in the Panhandle and along the Atlantic coast and are dependent on beach dunes for their entire life cycle. Beach mice rely exclusively on coastal dunes for foraging and constructing underground burrows throughout the dune landscape. Beach mice, as you can imagine, are vulnerable to habitat loss from large-scale development of native habitat to anthropogenic uses. Intact patches of suitable habitat have become a very significant area and priority for recovery of mice. Disturbance to those habitats compound the pressure from habitat loss and degradation. So the Florida salt marsh vole is found in saltgrass meadows that neighbor black meal rush. So this species has an extremely limited range near Cedar Key in the Lower Swanee River National Wildlife Refuge in the Big Bend. So this species is actually extremely rare, and I've never seen one myself, and most people have not ever seen one because they're so rare. So as you can imagine, similar theme here, coastal mammals also face many climate-related threats, and their overall vulnerability is moderate to very high. The main climate-related threat to mammals are sea level rise, increased storms and hurricane frequency and intensity, and increase in non-native predators. Because beach mice spend their entire lives in the dunes and salt marsh voles have such a limited habitat range, sea level rise will directly result in loss of habitat for all of these animals. So you can see in this picture here that we've lost 75 to 100 meters of dunes and escarpment. And this is a photo from Hurricane Michael. So I think many of you here may have remembered that hurricane back in 2018. It was very devastating for this part of Florida. So this was taken at St. Joe Peninsula State Park. So detection rates at this park was around 90% for beach mice before the storm. And then immediately after, it dropped down to 64% afterwards. So it was a pretty steep decline in the population that we could detect in the distribution across that landscape. So a storm that hits the Big Bend area where the salt marsh will occur could literally wipe out that entire species and cause extinction there. Next slide. So one thing I wanted to point out is how are we able to know how these populations are doing? How can we actually tell these impacts? So I wanted to just call out a couple of our programs that we're working on with the agency that helps to offset some of the very direct immediate threats, as well as be able to inform the long-term challenges and potential solutions. So I mentioned earlier that the state has a shorebird program. This is a grant-funded program that's a statewide collaboration with FWC, Audubon, Fish and Wildlife Service, and many, many other partners. So through this program, we have the Florida Shorebird Alliance. This is an extensive volunteer program. I highly recommend looking into this program if you're looking for any kind of shorebird experience. They have over 3,000 volunteers registered, so it's literally like the largest volunteer program in the country, which is pretty remarkable. So this program is critical for the protection of shorebird nesting sites. As I mentioned before, shorebirds nest on beaches, and people really like to use beaches and vacation and recreate there. So we need staff and volunteers to help post signs and rope to show people where nesting activity is occurring to avoid impacting and accidentally stepping on those nests. So through this program, we're able to develop recommendations on how to manage and gives indication on the population status of these birds in the state. So we also have a sea turtle program. So this is a multi-division partnership collaboration that combines research, policy, and hands-on monitoring to track nests and populations throughout the state. And then finally, we have the long-term beach mouse monitoring program. Since beach mice mostly were listed in the 1970s, and in 2004 with Hurricane Ivan, the Perdido Key beach mouse was functionally extinct over on Perdido Key. Researchers were keen on monitoring populations to make sure that beach mice don't succumb to extinction without realizing it. So using passive tracking methods, active trapping methods as well to understand the population status, those population numbers and trends over time, we're able to understand the distribution and threats and then mediate for those threats. So this is a growing program, and the baseline information that's been collected over the past 15 years is helping to prioritize monitoring and develop strategic site-specific restoration work to protect these species. Next slide. So from here, we're going to dive a little bit more into some of the climate change initiatives and FWC's effort to address climate change. So Farah is going to take it away from here.
All right, thank you very much, Emily. So Emily just talked about some of the programs that we have to monitor and address climate change. And I'm going to talk about some of the FWC's specific efforts to address climate change. I'm just going to go over a few of the highlights, but this demonstrates FWC's commitment to addressing climate change. So one tool that we have available, and this is available to planners, researchers, and others whose work involves wildlife and habitats. It's called the Climate Adaptation Explorer. And you can see the site address, climateadaptationexplorer.org, and we'll have that on the final slide as well as a resource for you. But I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what this tool does, how to use it, what it presents, and we'll just talk a little bit about the Climate Adaptation Explorer. So on the top of the screen, you'll see that there's 4 main tabs. So impacts describes some of the general climate impacts around the whole state of Florida. The 4th tab, which is adaptation strategies, talks about some general adaptation strategies, again, around the whole state of Florida. Now, if you want to drill down and find out some more specific information about species and habitats, you can click on one of those 2 tabs at the top, and we're going to do that in the next slide. So this slide, we've clicked on species, and you'll see in the left panel that there are 6 major taxa groups, and those are amphibians, birds, fish, invertebrates, mammals, and reptiles. So we kind of grouped all the invertebrates together. It's kind of a large grouping there, but the vertebrates are broken down into their 5 main taxa groups. So what you can do is you can click on any one of these and find out, you drill down to a specific species. So if you go down to the birds tab, and then you scroll down to where it says shorebirds and seabirds, which are a particular type of bird that Emily just mentioned in her presentation. And then let's say you scroll down to a specific species, which we're going to look at the black skimmer really quickly. And that was one of the ones that Emily talked about. And you'll see that the overall vulnerability of that species is moderate to high. And so for every species in this Climate Adaptation Explorer, it lists their vulnerability from the blue lower all the way up to the highest, which is red. So we actually gathered the information for part of the presentation from our Climate Adaptation Explorer, and Emily mentioned the resources where that came from. So if you scroll down on the Black Skimmer page, you'll see that there's also a map of habitat impacted by up to 3 meters of sea level rise. And so you'll see that at 1 meter of sea level rise, 60% of their habitat is impacted. And with 3 meters of sea level rise, which is highly likely, 89% of the habitat of Black Skimmer is going to be impacted by sea level rise. That's almost all of their habitat. If you want to explore more in depth into the specific parts of their habitats around the state, then you can click on Explore Interactive Map down underneath of the map of Florida, and it will allow you to do some research into those specific areas. And as I mentioned, the researchers and land planners and others will use this tool, and you can use this tool as well in your classes, and specifically to research what happens to different taxa groups in different scenarios. So our next tool that I want to talk about, or our next effort, is our Gulf Coast Climate Adaptation and Resilience Training course. So this was a course for professionals who want to learn how to incorporate adaptation into their work. This was an online course, and this was recorded, and all of the recordings are actually available on YouTube. So again, if you want to research this and watch how to incorporate climate adaptation into your work, you can watch, and the YouTube link is listed at the top of the image here. And this image is the first thumbnail for session 1, which was applying the climate smart conservation model. All these 9 numbers here are the sessions. So this course was done over the course of like 3 months, 4 months, something like that. And we had several attendees from not only Florida, but also other parts of the Gulf Coast, because again, this was adapting to a changing Gulf region, which is the entire Gulf Coast, including Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. So all of those participants were able to learn these 9 principles. So the main principles, as I mentioned, were applying the climate smart model, addressing uncertainty by managing for change, vulnerability and its link to adaptation. So we talked about the vulnerability through the Climate Adaptation Explorer. Number 4, communicating adaptation solutions. So this is a tool or a lesson for how to communicate that with the public. Session 5 is implementing adaptation. Session 6 is continuing to overcome barriers to implementation. So really drilling down into what are those barriers that there are, whether it be financial or logistical or whatever the case may be. Session 7 was integrating climate risk into adaptation action. Session 8 was anticipating human responses to climate change. Again, dealing with the public and their responses. And number 9, the changing role of natural resource managers. So most of the folks who took this class were natural resource managers. And so we taught them how to change their role as time goes on. So our next effort that we are doing to address climate change is sort of greening of the agency of FWC. So the climate change core team that Emily mentioned which I'm a part of, will focus on reviewing, identifying, and defining opportunities for long-term cost savings, increasing energy efficiency, and reducing waste at multiple scales. So that includes the individual, a facility, a particular building, regional, in our 5 regions, and then agency-wide across the state. Some examples of potential approaches that we are looking to do to green our agency. At the facility or regional scale, there's considerations of greener and or more economical long-term investment options in procuring facilities upgrades and repairs. So you may be aware that many of the greener solutions can be more economical. So at that nexus of earth-friendly and economics is where we really want to focus our efforts. So energy efficiency, we want to have fuel efficient or electric vehicles at some point. And then we want to have an energy efficient IT, information technology policy. And some of that would include software-based power management or low energy consumption hardware. Sustainable energy resources, or sustainable energy sources, I should say. So that would include things like LED bulbs, light sensors, cooling and heating upgrades. And then at the small group or individual scales, we would like to incorporate things like recycling programs and reducing plastic and paper use. So these are things that we are planning to do over the next several years as our agency becomes more green as we go along. So those are 3 of the highlights that that our agency is doing to address climate change. And another way to address climate change is through living shorelines. Part of FWC's climate change adaptation is to use green infrastructure, and living shoreline is a type of green infrastructure. So for this next few slides, I'm going to talk about living shoreline. So you may be wondering, what is a living shoreline? So the definition is here on this slide. You'll notice that right up front, it provides erosion control benefits. That's kind of the main reason for having a living shoreline, is for erosion control. Secondly, it protects, restores, or enhances natural shoreline habitat. So in order to maintain a natural habitat, you're going to need to implement some natural elements into your shoreline, and that will either protect or restore what is there or what could be there. Thirdly, it maintains coastal processes through the strategic placement of plants, stones, sand fill, and other structural organic materials. Now, those coastal processes that it maintains are going to be things like allowing for the living things to migrate between the waterward and the landward end of your living shoreline. Also allowing for the tides and other coastal process, sediment transport. All of those are coastal processes that would have happened if we did not put up borders to block them. So living shorelines allow those processes to take place. And so what do we use? We use plants, stone, sand fill, biologs, oyster reefs, etc. And in the picture on the left below, you'll see that there's some plants planted, there's some biologs, and out in front, there's some oyster reefs. And in the picture on the right, you'll see plants and the curved oyster reefs. So for the next slide is talking about the benefits of living shorelines compared to seawalls. So you'll notice that both traditional erosion control, which is seawalls, and living shorelines, they both do the first 2 things. They reduce immediate shoreline erosion and they reduce future shoreline erosion. But after that, that's where the differences are, because All the rest of those benefits are only done by living shorelines, not by seawalls. So a few facts that I'd like to point out to you is that an acre of salt marsh, which is used in living shorelines, is valued at between $981 and $6,500. So that's a pretty significant amount for 1 acre, and that will increase over time as the components establish themselves. So salt marshes trap sediment and organic matter. They may increase the surface elevation through production of below ground biomass as well. So the cumulative ecosystem effects of hardened shorelines, which are going to be your seawalls, are that they negatively affect benthic infauna, which you may be familiar with that term, but if not, that's the living things that are in the bottom sediments under the water. And that's in the adjacent subtidal habitat. So what happens is that diminishes predator densities and less productivity in the shoreline system. So even narrow marshes have been shown to slow waves and reduce shoreline erosion. Spartina, which is cordgrass, those types of salt marshes dissipate wave energy by 50% within the first 2.5 meters. So a 15-foot marsh, which is pretty much a standard size for a living shoreline, can absorb 50% of incoming wave energy. So that will significantly change the amount of erosion that would happen at that shoreline. Also, another benefit is storm protection. So on sheltered coasts along the North Carolina Outer Banks, marshes outperformed bulkheads during Category 1 Hurricane Irene in 2011. So the marsh and sill designs accreted sediment, which is what you want, while 75% of the bulkheads surveyed were damaged. So during severe storms, even more severe than the Hurricane Irene, the bulkheads can fail altogether. For example, along the South Carolina coast near Charleston, 58% of bulkheads were destroyed during Hurricane Hugo in 1989. So you'll see that there's a lot of benefits here for living shorelines, including recreational and aesthetic opportunities. So a lot of people are able to maintain or develop such things as a kayak launch. They can fish from their shores and watch wildlife and enjoy the natural view of the coastal areas. And living shorelines are more cost effective. That's a big, important selling point for living shorelines because both the installation and maintenance is more cost effective than traditional erosion control practices. And I'll just sum up by saying that it's estimated that as long as things keep going as they are now without changing, 33% of shorelines in the United States will be hardened by 2100. That decreases fisheries habitat and biodiversity. But we're looking to change that. And in order to do that, some of our efforts, I'm going to talk about our efforts to increase living shorelines or promote their use. So one of the efforts that we're doing to promote living shorelines is installation and demonstration projects. So this particular one is at the Mosquito Lagoon Marine Enhancement Center, and that is down at the Marine Discovery Center in Volusia County. And you'll see that there's native plants with oyster bags, terracing with oyster bags. There's even a kayak launch and a retaining wall with oyster bags. There's also a retaining wall, a seawall with various improvements like coquina riprap. And there's also an oyster bag planter, which you can see, and riprap with native plants, which you can see in the right-hand picture. So these are some of our demo projects. Another effort that we're doing to promote living shorelines is our marine contractor training course. So this course has an overall goal of increasing the number of marine contractors who can assess dynamic eroding shorelines and provide solutions featuring living shorelines where feasible. So the objectives of our training course Number one, we want to create an interactive 2-day training, which we have done, and we have offered it now 3 times throughout the state. Delivering the course in high need areas. Like I said, we've done that 3 times. Offer certification in CEU or continuing education unit incentives. So all the marine contractors who take our course are eligible for 6 hours of CEUs, and that goes toward their required 14 hours that they have to maintain to keep their license. And then fourthly, we want to develop a mentorship program. This part we're still working on, the mentorship program part, but all the others we're actively doing right now. As a matter of fact, just this week, we finished a marine contractor training course in the Pensacola area. It was a hybrid course. It was between, the first day was all virtual, and then the second day was all in the field outdoors. And I just want to show you a few pictures from our very first contractor training course, which took place in the St. Petersburg area. You'll see the field trip in the first picture on the left there. So that was at a completed living shoreline, and you'll see that there's plants and riprap and other elements there for that living shoreline. On the right, you'll see a classroom picture of students looking at a brochure and their workbooks and working through group exercises. The third thing I want to point out that we do in order to promote living shorelines is partnerships. That's a big part. So we have what we call estuarine restoration teams, or ERTs for short. So there's 4 right now, 1 in the Northeast, 1 in the East Central, 1 in the Southwest, and 1 in the Panhandle. And if you are interested in becoming a part of one of these estuarine restoration teams, then I have the email address here for you to contact to ask to be put on the mailing list. And there are many students, graduate students, undergrads, who are part of these groups. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in restoration or living shorelines, I recommend that you become part of this group. Other partnerships that we have are indicated by all the logos down here at the bottom of the slide. National Wildlife Federation was highly instrumental in the course that was this week that took place in the Pensacola area. The Pensacola and Perdido Bays Estuary Program funded that. And the Tampa Bay Estuary Program was instrumental in the St. Petersburg course. Sea Grant, Florida is offering the course in May. So there's lots of partnerships that were part of this. The Ecosphere Restoration Institute is a nonprofit organization, and so is the Marine Discovery Center and Tampa Bay Watch. So now I think I'm going to hand it back over to Emily to talk about working at FWC.
Thank you, Farah. Yes, and definitely plug into the PERT if you can. They send out many resources very often, and from grant opportunities, sometimes even vacant positions and things like that. So it's a great way to plug in. And that kind of helps to segue into working at FWC, and building your network and understanding what types of positions you're interested in. But broadly speaking, FWC, we have sort of different areas that you can work in. So law enforcement, as I mentioned earlier, is a pretty large program. We do, as an agency, depend a lot on our research institute. So there's a huge, diverse number of opportunities there, working from aquatics to terrestrial species to modeling to data managers. So it's pretty diverse there. You can also get into things like management. So I do mostly wildlife management and help recommend different management plans for species conservation. But we also have groups that focus on specifically habitat management with prescribed fire and wetland restoration. We also have groups within the agency that focus on policy development, developing programs like the Climate Corps team. We have our media folks, so there's a huge number of people working on our social media presence, communicating press releases. And then we also have a division focused on grants in our finance and budget. So there's something for everyone with FWC, that's for sure. But one thing which all of you are currently attending school, so that's great. Most of these positions do require a college education degree with relative experience. Some of our higher level positions require multiple years of experience, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But some of these positions could be biological scientists, accountants, personnel technicians, grant specialists, environmental specialists. So the big takeaway is get your experience where you can through coursework, through career development programs, through trainings like the ones Farah had mentioned, and any volunteer opportunities that you can find. Next slide. So careers, types of jobs. So for folks that are just graduating, maybe with an undergraduate degree, maybe have some limited experience, there are entry-level positions that are available. These can be technician positions, but primarily you would see them listed as OPS or biological scientist 1. So 1 and 2s are typically the entry-level positions. This is great for an early career professional, and these positions are kind of more of the fun jobs because they focus more on the field work and on-the-ground duties that are really fundamental in learning what's going on at a site and building that into policy and planning in the future. So some examples, and here are all photos of people who are in, technician or early, field positions, taking photos and their experiences out there in the field. So we have people who do seagrass monitoring that go out and collect the data and assess seagrass restoration works, oyster reef recovery biologists who go out and sample, aquatic conditions as well as oyster growth and those types of conditions. And then we have examples of like shorebird biologists or beach mice biologists who go out and collect the data and do the monitoring. Next slide, please. So once you develop those skills and are very feeling that you have mastered your entry-level position, we do have sort of mid-level and advanced positions within the agency. And so mid-level positions, I could speak for myself here that I'm in this position. I'm a biological scientist 4. I oversee project development, grant writing, acquisition of funds. I analyze data or work with my team to have a collective management set of management actions. I oversee projects and staff. I oversee our budget and multiple budgets for grants. So you have much more of a role in the administrative side of things. And often mid-level type biologists will represent special topics to our leadership team or at commission meetings. So this mid-level position is often an intermediate between our field staff and partners and leadership. So as you get into more of the advanced positions, which often require several years of experience on the ground and working within our agency and partners and government agencies, this position typically focuses on administrative tasks, policy planning, things that may go to the legislator, to our commissioners, public engagement. They're involved in commission meetings, maybe leading those, presenting high-level information to them. They may oversee state level or division budgets, maybe providing budget proposals to the legislator, provides guidance for communicating policy to staff. So often these positions provide guidance from our leaders in the commission to division leaders to field staff, that can be routed down. So again, these positions typically communicate the collective strategies that are needed to reach our agency's goals and play a role in ensuring that the agency is working in the best interests of the public and our natural resources. Next slide. So benefits. So I've mentioned before, we have a huge number of opportunities and skills that you can get from working with our agency, focused on wildlife research, budget management, all those things. So the opportunities are numerous and diverse. You have the ability to advance through trainings as we do prioritize investing inward, making sure that our staff are getting the support and the training and the skills they need to be the best at their job and representative of our agency. So one thing to note as you start looking for positions with the state and with FWC, you may see the OPS or FTE category. And so this is important as it affects benefits and pay and all that. So typically entry-level positions are OPS, which is other personnel services. So these positions are more readily available. We have less constraints to create those positions, and typically we can pretty easily create a position like that if we have money to be able to pay for a position. So you often would see those associated with grants, special initiatives, or in some cases there may be long-term funding for a specific job that is needed to help advance our mission. So the trade-off, though, you're getting a lot of good experience, but you don't get the paid time off. You have to work every hour, or you get paid for every hour that you work. But there is subsidized health insurance available and an investment retirement option available. When you move into a full-time position or an FTE, this is where you get more of the state benefits. You get the paid time off, full retirement benefits. Some of the other perks as an FTE position, you may be approved for tuition waiver if you're interested in pursuing college courses or a degree that's related to your job, and then other benefits. The downside is we are only authorized to have a set number of FTE positions by the legislator, so those are much more limited and can be more competitive. But a great way to kind of get your foot in the door is taking on one of these entry-level positions to move yourself into a more permanent full-time position. Next slide. So if you're not familiar with this site, I've been sending Siddiqui openings, so hopefully you guys have seen this website. This is our state of Florida job board. So you can see I've highlighted on the left side, the little yellow circle says search for a job. So this is our People First website. So when you click on that, you're able to go to our website where you can see sort of a search bar or search by location or search by category. So many of you all here may be interested in the science, technology, and engineering, mathematics category. So you would click on that and then you could see the available positions that are open. So you would apply for those jobs through the People First website. Next slide. So as you probably have heard from other career development presentations or engagement opportunities, some of the general requirements for working for FWC are very similar to any other agency or NGO that you may be interested in. So a degree in a natural resource field, environmental, biological, is pretty much standard for an FWC position. It's important to have related courses and trainings to enhance your KSAs, which we love our acronyms, but that means knowledge, skills, and abilities. So you can kind of browse some of those jobs to kind of see what sort of KSAs are being asked of these positions, and then start honing your opportunities to sort of meet those qualifications. So other things like experience and opportunities in data management or information to hone those skills is very important. That's something that's desirable for anyone in a professional position. Communication and written skills are also important. Often as biologists, we have to communicate to the public. For example, Bear and I are giving this great presentation to you all now, so we have to be able to communicate this information and be able to write things in a way that can be translatable to the public as well as our staff and supervisor and vice versa. So other things to note that I believe are very important whenever I look at it as someone coming in, especially new, is looking at their volunteer experience. Often it's hard to get these entry-level positions or jobs that give you that experience, that are fully paid. So any kind of volunteer opportunities, even if it's a couple hours here and there, is important so that you're at least getting exposure to the type of work that an agency does. So another thing that you should have is an interest in field work. A lot of the positions with FWC, do require some level of experience in the field and getting out in the field. So that's something that, it's good to be open to if you can, but there are other positions where they are more office-based, but primarily with FWC, you do see a lot of that outdoor work, which is, desirable by many people. So pretty standard, polished resume and a strong cover letter. So those are the things that can really make or break you, when someone first looks at your skills and, your qualifications. So getting in touch with a mentor or professor, or even myself or Farah, I know I'm more than happy to help give feedback on resume and cover letters, obviously with advance notice, but just having that input from another professional can be very critical and get you that edge over others. And as always, having a strong positive attitude and perseverance is very important, because in my case, when I graduated from college, I applied to about 100 jobs and had 3 interviews. And so it was very difficult. But once you do get that experience, then it does become much more easy to move into other positions. So with that, I think Farah is going to transition to working at FWC and talking about internships and volunteer experiences, and focus on some of those highlights.
All right, thank you. So as Emily mentioned, we also have internships and volunteering experiences, which can allow you to get your foot in the door, so to speak. So both of these are unpaid options, but again, the experience that they provide is incredibly valuable. These are some pictures of some of our past interns through different programs. And I'm going to quickly just list off the types of internships that we have. The Coastal Wildlife Conservation internship, that's the one that I manage. And so we're actually reviewing applications right now for the summer semester. There's the Wildlife Conservation and Management, Climate Adaptation, FWRI, Law Enforcement, Wildlife Impact Management, Marine Fisheries Management, and the Florida Black Bear, Manatees, and Marine Turtles. So all those internships are accepting new students every semester. So some of the other opportunities that are available through volunteering are through our Gopher Tortoise program, Southeastern American Kestrel, native plantings and invasive plant management, nest box monitoring for birds, wildlife surveys, habitat cleanups, which you may be familiar with those, aquatic habitat conservation and restoration, non-native species management, shorebirds and seabirds, and scrub jay monitoring. And I will just point out, as Emily mentioned earlier in her presentation, the shorebirds and seabirds opportunities for volunteering include posting some of those areas like critical wildlife areas and other nesting areas for those birds, monitoring, and also serving as a bird steward or a communicator to the public about those birds. So all of these provide many volunteer opportunities. So the benefits of either interning or volunteering. Number one, you get experience working in conservation. Number two, real world application of your skills. So all the stuff that you're learning in school, you actually get to start doing some of it. Number three, enrichment activities. We provide additional activities beyond the scope of what your primary project or even your secondary project is. And those can include field experiences or outreach experiences, getting to meet people, network, getting to be involved in some of the leadership meetings and things like that. There's a potential for earning course credit with several of the internships, including the one that I manage. And next to last, connections and networking opportunities are opened up big time once you get your internship or volunteering foot in the door. And lastly, many interns eventually become FWC employees. And that's maybe one of the biggest benefits. The student in the picture on this slide, her name is Caitlin, and in this slide, she was an intern. That was a couple of 2 or 3 years ago, and now she works with the agency, and she's working on her PhD. So lots of opportunities for benefits there. So how do you get to apply for these? So finding the openings, all the openings are found at this website here, the internship webpage, which is, I have a screenshot of it here in the bottom right. Also, you can watch for the flyers and announcement at your university. Make sure that you meet all the required qualifications when you're applying. Submit all your application materials, including your resume and cover letter, in addition to the application form. And then finally, be prepared for an interview if you're invited for that. And don't just show up. Be prepared when you come in for your interview, because even these internships are competitive as well. So the general requirements for the internships are, most of them require college junior or senior or graduate. Some of them accept younger students, but most have the upper level. Some internships require a GPA greater than 3.0. At a minimum, I think you need a 2.75 for some, and then the skills. So some of these are required, some are preferred, but you definitely need to have Microsoft Office applications down pat. Secondly, geographic information systems, or GIS. If you have that skill, it'll definitely give you a leg up. This picture on the right, this image was done by one of my interns last semester, and she put together this through GIS. She had those skills and was able to use them. Verbal and written communication, just the same as for our professional positions. Familiarity with fish and or wildlife. And then lastly, the ability to do field work. As Emily mentioned, the entry level stuff requires that. So I'm going to recap our presentation now. I know we're coming up on the last, at the end of our time here. So there's 6 main points to note. FWC works on issues that impact wildlife, and that includes climate change, shoreline stabilization, and we do that through several agency initiatives. Climate change impacts marine turtles, shorebirds, and beach mice in many ways, and that's through sea level rise, temperature, increased storms, and harmful algal blooms that Emily talked about. So FWC addresses these climate change impacts with tools and operational changes. And that includes things like the Climate Adaptation Explorer, online courses, and choosing green options for daily operations. Shoreline stabilization is best accomplished through living shorelines, which have many ecological, economic, and protective benefits. And I went over all those in detail. FWC promotes living shorelines through installation and education. And lastly, FWC has opportunities for careers, internships, and volunteering. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and leave you with this last slide and take any questions.